There's a 2-second window. Most people never know it exists. But in those 2 seconds, while you're still talking, still constructing your story, still watching their face for signs that it's landing, an empath has already made a decision about you. Not a suspicion, not a question, a decision. And what happens after those 2 seconds is what this entire video is about. Because here's what nobody explains when they talk about empaths. It's not about what they feel, it's about what they do with it. And what they do with it will change your relationship in ways you won't see coming and won't be able to reverse once they've begun. So pay attention. Because by the time most people figure this out, it's already too late to use it. Let me give you something that almost every other piece of content on this topic skips entirely: the actual science. Because understanding what's happening in an empath's brain when you lie to them isn't just interesting. It explains every behavior you're about to hear about and why those behaviors feel so final when you're on the receiving end of them. Your brain has a system called the limbic system. It's your emotional processing center. It handles fear, attachment, threat detection, and social bonding. In most people, this system operates quietly underneath conscious thought. You feel things, but you're not constantly overwhelmed by the emotional data coming from the people around you. The system runs in the background. In empaths, researchers believe this system is significantly more active. Some studies on high-sensitivity individuals and mirror neuron activity suggest that certain people process external emotional cues with the same intensity most people reserve for their own internal experiences. In plain language, an empath doesn't just observe your emotional state from the outside. Their nervous system mirrors it from the inside. This is not a metaphor. When you are experiencing stress, your body produces physical signals. Your vocal pitch shifts slightly. Your breathing pattern changes. Micro-expressions, facial movements that last less than 1/5 of a second, flicker across your face. Your posture and gesture patterns alter in ways you're completely unaware of. The average person misses most of this. An empath's nervous system is running a continuous, automatic scan that catches all of it without their conscious participation. So when you lie, you're not just producing false words, you're producing a body under neurological conflict, because your brain knows the truth and is simultaneously generating a different version of it. And that conflict creates a signal. A signal an empath's nervous system reads the same way yours reads a loud noise in a quiet room. You don't choose to hear it, you just do. And in those 2 seconds, they've heard it. But here's the part that most people never understand. The part that makes lying to an empath genuinely different from lying to almost anyone else. They don't react. They catalog. This is where people make the mistake that costs them everything. When an empath goes completely calm after sensing something is wrong, the natural human interpretation is either they didn't notice or they're letting it go. Both of those interpretations are wrong. What the calm actually represents is emotional regulation under pressure. An empath who has just caught you in something is doing something incredibly demanding in real time. They are managing the neurological impact of betrayal while simultaneously controlling their external response and making a strategic decision about what to do next. That composure is not indifference, it's restraint. And underneath it, something very specific is happening. They are opening a file with your name on it. And every interaction you have from that point forward is being compared automatically and continuously against what they now know. Think about what that actually means. You told a lie, maybe something you considered minor, a reason you gave for missing something, a detail you changed because the truth felt complicated. In your mind, it's closed. In their mind, it's a reference point. The next time you speak, your words are running against that reference point. The next time you explain something, the explanation is being tested for consistency, not aggressively, not accusingly, quietly, automatically, like a background process you can't see but that's running at full capacity. And what they're watching for isn't the lie they already know about, it's whether the lie was an accident or a pattern. Because that distinction, accident or pattern, is the difference between someone they stay close to and someone they begin to quietly leave. Now here's where the psychology gets genuinely surprising. And I want you to stay with this because this is the part that changes everything. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called the violation of expectation. When your brain builds an accurate mental model of how someone operates, and something shatters that model, your nervous system doesn't just feel confused. It activates a threat response. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, treats a broken expectation about a trusted person the same way it treats physical danger. Because for most of human history, being wrong about someone you trusted was physical danger. It meant your judgment about your safety was faulty. Empaths experience this violation more intensely than most people because they invested more in building the model. They didn't just learn surface facts about you. They absorbed your patterns, your rhythms, your emotional language. They built a detailed internal representation of who you are. And when a lie breaks that model, it doesn't just create a crack, it destabilizes the entire architecture. This is why lying to an empath doesn't just hurt them, it disorients them at a level most people never have to deal with. And that disorientation triggers a 3-stage response that happens automatically, beneath conscious thought, and almost always without you seeing any of it from the outside. Stage 1 is what I call silent verification. After sensing that something is off, an empath doesn't confront you, not immediately. Instead, they start asking questions they already know the answer to. Small ones, casual ones. Nothing that would seem unusual in a normal conversation. They're testing consistency. They're watching to see whether your story holds under the lightest possible pressure. If you're telling the truth, nothing unusual happens. But if you hesitate where you shouldn't, if you add details you didn't mention before, if your energy shifts when a certain topic comes up, they notice, and the file gets thicker. You'll never know this is happening, that's the point. The verification is designed to be invisible, and by the time it's complete, they already have the confirmation they were looking for without you ever realizing you were being checked. Stage 2 is emotional reallocation. This is the stage that looks like nothing from the outside but is everything on the inside. Once an empath has confirmed what they suspected, even just to themselves, even without proof they could show anyone, they begin to redistribute their emotional investment. Think of the energy an empath brings to a relationship as a currency. Before the lie, they were spending freely, fully present, sharing deeply, investing attention and care without measuring it. After the confirmation, they begin quietly pulling funds. Not all at once. Not in a way you'd notice on any given day. Just a slow, steady redirect of their emotional resources away from full investment in you and toward protecting themselves. You'll feel it as a slight change in temperature. Conversations that once felt effortless start requiring a little more effort from you to sustain. The organic warmth starts to feel slightly managed. They're still kind, still present, still showing up. But something that used to flow naturally now has a quality of careful maintenance to it. And most people can't identify why. They just know something is different, and they can't put their finger on what changed. What changed is that you're no longer experiencing their full presence. You're experiencing a version of them that has a guard on it. A version that still functions in the relationship, but is no longer pouring into it the way it was before. Stage 3 is what I call the peaceful exit. And this is the stage that catches people the most off guard. Because by the time an empath reaches this point, they've done something extraordinary that most people don't realize is even possible. They've processed the loss before the loss has officially happened. While you were still in the relationship, assuming things were relatively normal, they were doing deep internal work, grieving the version of the relationship they thought they had, accepting that what felt entirely real to them wasn't fully real in the space between both of you, coming to terms with the gap between who they believed you were and who you've been demonstrating yourself to be. And because they completed that emotional processing internally, when they finally create real distance, when they finally step back in a way you can't ignore, they don't do it with anger, they do it with calm. And that calm is deeply unsettling to people who expected a fight. Because a fight means there's still enough investment to create friction. A fight means the connection still has heat. But when an empath exits with peace, it means the heat is already gone. They've already let go of the outcome. They're not fighting for it because they've already concluded it was built on ground they can't stand on. And here's what makes that moment so permanent. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was a rational one, made after all the emotion was fully processed and set aside. And rational decisions made from a place of clarity and completed emotional work are almost impossible to reverse with apologies and explanations. Because the decision wasn't made in heat. It won't respond to heat. It responds to evidence. Consistent, accumulated, time-demonstrated evidence that something real has changed. And most people waiting for that second chance don't understand what kind of evidence they'd actually need to provide. Now I want to take a step back from the empath for a moment and talk about the person on the other side of this. Because here's something that gets almost no attention in conversations like this one. When someone lies to a person who genuinely cares about them, not habitually, not sociopathically, but in the way most people do, bending the truth to avoid discomfort or protect an image, it's almost never coming from a place of pure selfishness. In the majority of cases, the lie is coming from fear. Fear that the truth is too complicated to explain. Fear that the real answer makes you look bad. Fear that this person you care about will see something in you that will make them step back. Here is the painful irony that needs to be said out loud. The one type of person in the world who is least likely to reject you for your honest truth is an empath. They don't do conditional connection. They're not evaluating whether your flaws make you worthy of their presence. They're not keeping score. What they need from you, the one thing that allows the full depth of their investment, is authenticity. The real version. The version with the complicated edges and the uncomfortable truths. So when you lie to an empath, you are protecting yourself from rejection by the exact person who was never going to reject you for being honest. You're activating your armor in the one space where the armor was never necessary. And in doing that, you eliminate the only thing that made the space feel safe to them in the first place. Think about that. They offered you something genuinely rare, a relationship where being real was not just acceptable, but required for the connection to deepen. And instead of meeting that with honesty, you met it with performance. And the performance told them everything they needed to know about whether you understood the value of what they were offering. Because an empath always knows when they're being met with less than they're giving. They can feel the imbalance between their openness and your management of what you let them see. Between their vulnerability and your controlled presentation. They don't always name it. They don't always address it directly, but they feel it continuously. And over time, that feeling of imbalance stops feeling like a temporary state and starts feeling like the definition of the relationship. And once it becomes the definition, they stop adjusting their expectations downward to accommodate it. They start asking whether the relationship still serves what they need at all. And that question, once seriously asked by an empath, tends to get answered with remarkable clarity. Because they don't answer it emotionally. They don't answer it based on what they wish were true or what you promised. They answer it based on the pattern of what's actually been happening, evaluated without the filter of hope. And patterns, once seen clearly, are very hard to argue against. Now here's something most content on this topic completely omits, and I think it's the most useful thing you can take from this video, regardless of which side of this dynamic you're on. If you are someone who has been dishonest with someone like this, and you want a real chance at rebuilding what the dishonesty damaged, there is something that actually works, but it isn't what most people try. Most people try apologies. And apologies in most cases are a mechanism for relieving the person's own guilt while placing the burden of acceptance on the person who was hurt. An empath sees through this immediately, not because they're cynical, but because their emotional processing is precise enough to detect the difference between an apology motivated by genuine accountability and one motivated by the desire to return things to comfortable. What actually reaches an empath, what their nervous system recognizes as authentic, because authenticity is literally what it's calibrated to detect, is specific, unqualified accountability. Not, "I'm sorry if that came across wrong." That places the hurt in question. Not, "I didn't mean for it to affect you that way." That redirects focus from impact to intent. What creates an opening is something much harder to say. "I lied about this specific thing. I understand what that cost you. I think I did it because of this, and I understand if it's changed what you're willing to invest here going forward." That kind of statement is rare. Almost no one says it. And its rarity is exactly why it works. Because an empath isn't just listening to the words, they're evaluating the emotional signature behind them. And the emotional signature of genuine accountability, the real discomfort of it, the absence of self-protection in it, registers in their nervous system as true the same way a lie registers as false. It doesn't automatically restore what was lost, but it opens a door that was otherwise sealed. The door, once open, requires something harder than a single statement. It requires a new pattern, one that contradicts the old pattern with enough consistency and enough time that it becomes the new reference point. That's not a process you rush. And it only makes sense to enter it if you're entering it because you've genuinely changed how you operate, not because you want back what you lost, but because you've understood something about yourself that you can't unknow. Because here's the truth that sits underneath all of this. The behavior that led to the lie, the habit of managing how people see you, of choosing the edited version over the real one, that behavior exists for a reason. It was installed somewhere in your history, usually early, usually in a context where being honest actually did carry consequences. Maybe the truth got you punished. Maybe vulnerability got you mocked. Maybe being real about what you wanted or needed got you dismissed. And so you learned to manage it, to package it, to present a version of yourself that was safe enough to exist in the spaces you needed to exist in. That programming made sense where it came from. It doesn't make sense here. And until you understand why it's still running, it will keep costing you in every relationship that has enough depth to matter. The person you were performing for, the empath you tried to manage the story with, they weren't a threat. They were the safest audience your real self was ever going to find. And the habit of hiding, which once protected you, turned the only space where you didn't need protection into a place where you couldn't stop performing. That's the real loss here. Not just the relationship, the proof that you had a place where you could have been entirely real and it still would have been enough. And you didn't take it. If you're an empath watching this, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. The weight of knowing things you weren't supposed to know is exhausting. Feeling the mismatch between what someone says and what their body is actually communicating, catching the inconsistencies before you have any way to prove them, knowing that something is off before anyone else in the room has registered it, that's an enormous amount of information to carry, especially when the person generating it is someone you care about. Your instincts in those moments are not paranoia. Your discomfort is not oversensitivity. When something feels wrong to you, that feeling is data produced by a highly calibrated system. Treat it as such. And know this: every time you have chosen to give someone the benefit of the doubt over what your nervous system was already telling you, you were not being foolish. You were being generous. Those are different things. But there is a point at which generosity without boundaries stops being a virtue and starts being a pattern that costs you your peace. And your peace is worth protecting. Not because it makes you selfish, but because the depth of what you offer other people requires that you maintain the reserves to offer it from. The connections you deserve are the ones where your honesty is met with honesty, where your openness is matched rather than managed, where you don't have to choose between what you feel and what you allow yourself to say about it. And every connection that asks you to suppress what you already know in order to maintain it is one that has already told you what it's built on. There's one last thing I want to leave you with. The empath in your life, the one you've been thinking about since the first minute of this video, didn't need you to be flawless. They didn't need your most polished story or your best defense of who you are. They needed the real thing, the unedited version, the one with the complicated parts still attached. Because that version, the honest, imperfect, actual you, is the only version they could have built something real with. Everything else was just a transaction, a performance for an audience that didn't need the performance. And what you had with them, that specific quality of being seen without flinching, of being understood without having to explain yourself completely, of existing in a space where your depth was matched rather than just accommodated, most people go their entire lives without finding that once. You had it, and a lie took it. Not because empaths are unforgiving, but because they are clear. And clarity, once arrived at, doesn't negotiate with the patterns that made it necessary. The door that dishonesty closes doesn't always open again. But the version of you that no longer needs to hide, that version has a chance everywhere.